It is great to be here. Glad you have come and made it. We're looking tonight at the whole issue of the leader and self-development. Very, very important subject for us, because if we're going to lead others, we need to be able to lead ourselves. And so it's very, very important that we give ourselves to issues that will grow us and develop us as we move forward. I think that self-leadership is one of the most challenging issues around today, because if we want to maintain a strong spirituality, then actually that's my responsibility. I may have a pastor, I may have a connect group leader, I may have a spouse, all who love Jesus passionately, who love me, but actually they can't watch me 24/7. They can't watch over me every minute of every day. I have to be able to take responsibility for some of the things that will help to grow me as a person. And for leaders especially, if you're involved in giving to others and sharing with others and leading others, well, you're in a situation where you're giving out a lot. And the danger is we just give, and we don't actually feed. And that's really important. And of course, we can feed in the same way that everybody else feeds on a Sunday. We can be blessed by the sermon. We can be blessed by the fellowship. But as leaders, I think we're called even further than that and deeper than that. So that actually we learn to feed ourselves. We learn to grow in God. We learn to develop ourselves. And I think that's crucially important. I want to base the teaching tonight on this very simple verse. It's found in Luke chapter 2. And it comes straight after the story of Jesus as a 12-year-old. In his culture, a 12-year-old man. In our culture, we would regard him as a young teenager, really. But in Jewish culture, he's just become a man. Moved from childhood to manhood in one step. He's in the temple, and he's spending time questioning and debating with the experts of the law in his day. He gets so sort of engrossed in that his parents leave for home, Nazareth, to the north of the country, about 120 miles north, and they set off home and realize after a little while that he's not with them. They circle back round to Jerusalem. After 3 days they find him, and they find him in the temple. And there's an interesting discourse that takes place. You can read this for yourself in Luke chapter 2. Mary says to Jesus, why have you done this? And Jesus says to her, didn't you know that I had to be about my Father's business? Now it's interesting, in the original language that the Bible is written in, the word Father's business or house is not there. And literally it reads this, that I'm about my Father's. In other words, Jesus understands something of the purpose of God for his life. And then they sort of say to him, let's go. And they go. And it says this, that Jesus went down with them to Nazareth and was obedient to them. Very powerful statement. Most people miss that and the power of that. And then Jesus returns to this little village, having been in this incredible temple experience. He returns to a village called Nazareth, which is not even on the main trading route of its day. If you and I went back to the first century world and Googled Nazareth, Google wouldn't be able to find it. It's not on the map. It's less than 300 people live in Nazareth. And yet that's where Jesus lives for the next 18 years. So from the end of Luke chapter 2, this verse 52, to the moment Jesus is baptized, Luke chapter 3, verse 21, 18 years have passed. Now when you and I read that in our Bibles, that might take 5 minutes to read. So from chapter 2 into chapter 3, those 21 verses take less than 5 minutes if you read them slowly. Those 21 verses represent 18 years of Jesus' life. The Bible does that a lot. You turn a page in the Bible and 50 years have passed. And we can just turn a page, but actually it's recognizing what's going on there. In those short verses, Jesus has lived 18 years. And we've been able to patch together some of the things that Jesus did because of the Bible and because of extra research that we've been able to use. But actually the only clue that Luke gives us that Jesus does in those 18 years is this. That's the only clue we have. So Whatever goes on in those 18 years, Dr. Luke doesn't tell us anything else about what Jesus did. He just tells us this. And it says this, that Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature, in favour with God and with man. Now, let me try and show a couple of things here for you, because the word grew there seems very, very simple. And sometimes when we talk about self-development, we think it's a business idea. And I've been consistently criticised over the years by people who, because I'm not necessarily quoting the text of the Bible, they think that what I'm teaching is not biblical. And yet, actually what we're talking about tonight didn't start in a business room, it started in the Bible. And the idea of self-development is biblical. And not only is it biblical, it's modelled by Jesus. And my understanding is this, if Jesus modelled self-development, then it must be important. Because Jesus was God in flesh, and at one level, as God in flesh, my goodness, he's got everything. And yet at another level, as a man, he has to grow. So if Jesus commits himself to self-development, then the challenge to me is, how much more do I need to commit myself to growth and self-development? So, when it says Jesus grew, the danger is that we just think of it like normal growth. Healthy things grow. And that's one of the dangers. But let me just show you something from the Gospel of Luke. This is the third time in chapter 2, verse 52. It's the third time in the Gospel of Luke we come across the word grow or grew. Alright? The first time is in chapter 1, verse 80, and it says this, and the child grew and became strong in spirit. Now that's referring to John, who later becomes John the Baptist. We know him as John the Baptist, alright? And it says there. Then, chapter 2, verse 40, it says almost identical words. It says, and the child grew and became strong. Now that time, it's not referring to John, it's referring to the child, Jesus. Okay? You with me so far? So we've got John grew and Jesus grew. And then we've got our verse, chapter 2, verse 52, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature. Alright, so let me highlight it for you. So we've got 3 references to grew. Now the problem we have in our English version of the Bible is that those 3 words look exactly the same. Correct? There's no trick there. Just to me and you reading that in our English Bible, it's grew. It's all the same. But actually, when you peel back the top layer of the Bible and you go into its original language, something really fascinating happens. We discover that in the first 2 references, the same word is used in the original language. For those who want to study it, it's the word oxano, which literally presents the idea that you grow naturally. Alright, so if you're healthy, you grow. If the child is healthy and you look after that child's just going to grow. Alright? So, the growing there in 180 and in 240 point to normal, natural growth. You with me? However, the grew in 252, Dr. Luke uses a different word. And he uses a gorgeous word, which in its original form means, it says prokopto. It's 2 words put together, pro and kopto. And the idea is pro going forward and kopto, the idea to cut out, to... If you and I were in a field together, full of high grass, and there was no path, and we wanted to get to the other side of the field, but there was no path to get there, and we took out our machetes, because we carry those around with us regularly, and we cut a pathway to the other side of the field, the path that we have cut is this picture. The idea is that me and you have deliberately cut a path. Alright? That's the idea. And that's really important as we look at this, because when Dr. Luke says Jesus grew in 252, he's not just saying that Jesus grew naturally, because that's what people do. He's saying that Jesus grew deliberately. The word means to beat forward, or to lengthen out by hammering, or to increase. That idea, if you forget the word, think of the picture of cutting a path. A deliberate action. And so, here's what we conclude. When Luke says Jesus grew, What he's really saying is that Jesus grew intentionally. Jesus grew on purpose. He grew deliberately. Now that's really important. That Jesus makes a decision to grow. It's not, it just happens to him. It happens to him because he wants it to happen to him. He puts himself in a position to grow. Now this is so important because when it comes to Jesus and what we call the incarnation, Christians are very lazy, generally speaking. And we're lazy because we haven't really got the courage sometimes to dig into the text and really look at what's going on. And here's what we sort of in our heads think. Well, Jesus grew because he was God. Jesus was clever because he was God. Jesus was able to be strong because he was God. Jesus was good in favour with God because he was God. And Jesus was great with people because he was God. Now that's the lazy answer. And Luke actually tells us, by using this word in this text, it is the lazy answer. Jesus grew because he wanted to grow. He deliberately grew. He made a decision to grow. Now, if you're a healthy person, you're going to physically grow naturally. You're just going to grow. Unless something starts to go wrong in our body, we're just going to grow naturally. But growing like this, growing in development, growing in maturity, growing in learning is a choice. It's a choice we make. And we make a decision, I want to grow. I want to be a better leader in this area. I want to learn how to use that tool better. I want to learn how to use an iPad. I want to learn how to play the piano. Alright? It could be a million things, but what you're doing is you're making a deliberate decision to learn and to grow. And I've been in the church a long time. I became a Christian when I was 8 years old, and I've been really in the church in many ways since then. Have been actively serving Jesus since my teenage years and studying the Bible seriously all my adult life. When I turned 18, I was in Bible college. So I've taken the study of the Bible seriously and followership of Jesus seriously. One of the things that I've sort of discovered in the church, and I love the church, is that many Christians want the payoff, they want the result of growth without making the decision to grow. So they want the end product without the process. They want that shiny gold medal without getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and training. Do you know what I mean? If we could just cross the line and get the gold, that would be brilliant. But actually, what Jesus even teaches us in those 18 years of silence, even the Son of God in flesh teaches us, he had to make a deliberate decision to grow. Alright? Now, the reason I'm labouring this is because I'm tired, really tired, of Christians telling me that self-development is not a biblical idea. It is totally biblical. I'm going to show you tonight from both the life of Jesus and from a profound Old Testament text that self-development is a total Bible idea and that leaders should be committed one way or another. All our journeys will look different. Your journey of development will look different from mine. But all of us should be committed to development and growth, whether we are 16 or 66. It makes no difference. Yes? It's open to all of us. So, why 252? Well, I believe this is really important for every Christian, but especially for leaders, because it points to personal growth. You and I need to be people who are committed to personal growth. That if I'm going to grow in my understanding of the Bible, I've got to cut a path in that area. If I'm going to grow with my physical well-being, I've got to cut a path. If I'm going to grow in my relationship with God, got to cut a path. If I want to be better with people, got to cut a path. It won't just happen. And people who tell you it will just happen have no clue what they're talking about. And there's no shortcut here in this issue. And sometimes, and I'm from a Pentecostal background, as are many of you. I've grown up in the Pentecostal church, and one of the dangers sometimes is that we've advocated an almost quick fix shortcut to maturity. That somehow we can come to the front, have a man or a woman of God wave a magic wand over us and sort of fix everything. Now, could God do miracles? Absolutely. Do I believe that? Absolutely. Have I seen them? Absolutely. And have I experienced them? Yes. When it comes to growth, there's no shortcut. There's no shortcut. You can't skip the route. You've got to go that route. Yep. My youngest daughter's just turned 13. And in our home, please don't be offended by this, but in our home, we've had 3 children. We try not to talk about them as teenagers because genuinely, I'm not trying to be funny now, I don't believe in things called teenagers, genuinely. And you're going to think it's weird. But the idea of teenager is not a biblical idea. And teenagers are a relatively modern invention. So we have referred to all our children from the moment they hit 13 as young adults. And we sort of joked with our youngest, because she's very, very energetic and very precocious, and we joked with our youngest that if we could sort of skip from 13 to 21, then, we'd give her anything she wanted. It's that sort of situation. But actually the reality is, if we want her to get to 21 mature, she's got to go through 14, 15, 16. Do you know what I mean? I know you know that's obvious, but in spiritual life, it's no different. And somehow we tend to think that process of getting to maturity as a Christian can be skipped. We can fast track it, we can do an abracadabra, a magic moment. Now, can God do something amazing in us on the journey? He really can, but we've got to be on the journey for God to do something amazing for us. Yeah? We've got to be putting ourselves in that position. So, personal growth is so important. Here's 2 things I want you to think about just by way of introduction. We cannot grow without learning. Now, as you'll find out tonight, by learning we don't mean just reading a book. We mean opening up your heart to grabbing wisdom and understanding that God wants us to have that we can put into life practice. That's what we're talking about in learning. We're not talking about getting a degree or going to university, though that could be part of someone's learning journey. We're talking really about getting God's wisdom and making it work. That's what we mean by learning. Is that okay? That's really important that we remember that. And we cannot grow without learning. Not this sort of growing. Alright? If you and I want to grow, we've got to learn something to help us grow. And then secondly, we cannot learn without growing. So that's the other side of it. If you're truly learning something in terms of God wisdom, life wisdom, you're growing. Now, it may not even feel like you're growing, but you are. When I was involved in the Bible college, I used to say to Bible students who were coming maybe to the end of their first term or first semester, I'd say to them, you'll go home and you'll be shocked. Now, not in every case, but in most cases, you'll go home and you'll be shocked how much you've grown. And here's how you know how much you've grown. When you go back to the world you've come from, it'll feel a bit smaller. Now, I don't mean that disparagingly and small as in bad. I mean, it'll feel a wee bit smaller. You've grown. It's like that moment when you try to get into that jacket or that dress or that pair of trousers that you really longingly think you could get into, and you can't because you've grown. You've moved on. And you're trying to get into them. I'll not dwell on that, but you'll try to get into them. And it's actually that moment where you're trying to fit into something that you've grown out of. And actually, sometimes we don't even know we're growing, but I want to tell you categorically that when you are truly engaging with God's learning, so you're responding to what God's trying to teach you in your life, you're responding to His Word, His presence in worship, you are growing. And sometimes you don't realize it until you have to do something or until you're in a different context. But you are growing. And it's amazing. My son is 17. He's 6'2". I'm 6'1". My son is now 6'2". My mother's 4'11". And when the last time my mother saw my son, it was when we were still living up at Rotherham, and then he went off to Africa for the summer, so she didn't see him over the summer holidays. And then he went across to see her. So my mum probably hadn't seen my son for about 11 months. Right? And the last time she saw him, he was about that size. The next time she sees him, he's that size. She was literally shocked. Now, we didn't notice it so much because he was living with us. It's not like we woke up and they went, oh, you know, where did those 5 inches come from? It's like he just, living with us, he just grew a little bit at a time, and then suddenly you realise it's not until we're buying him new clothes or all his old clothes doesn't fit, we suddenly realise, my goodness, look at how tall he's got. My mother, however, hadn't seen him for 11 months. The last time she saw him, he was that size, and now, wow, she needs a letter to sort of kiss him. He's grown so much. She noticed the difference, and it wasn't until he was in a different context that the growth was obvious. So some of you are in leadership positions and you don't feel like you're growing, or you feel like it's just routine. And sometimes we've got to encourage ourselves with the fact that we are growing, probably more than we know. But it's just you're in your routine situation every day. And people don't really notice it. And it's not until you go somewhere else, people notice it. Or see it. Yes? That's something for us to think about. Okay, so how did Jesus sort of get so smart? How did Jesus sort of grow in these areas? There's 4 areas in which Jesus grew. First area is wisdom. Speaking of intellectual development, that's what the word points to. It doesn't just mean like mystic wisdom, it means just understanding. Jesus knew stuff. He learned stuff. He grew in wisdom. The second area he grows is stature. The word there literally points to the idea of maturity. But in the context, it means more than that. It means more than just that Jesus grew into physical maturity. It means that Jesus was deliberate about his physical development. He literally took that seriously. And I wish I had time to unpack some of that stuff, because we would see the physical Jesus in a very, very different way when we see just how strong he was, just how amazing he was physically. We have tended to allow Jesus to be painted as a physical wimp, and yet the evidence, biblical evidence, demonstrates he was probably supremely fit and someone who could endure long journeys and seriously punishing situations. And so that doesn't happen by accident. That happened deliberately. He was physically fit for the call that God had for him. The third area is favour with God. This points to your spiritual development. So we've got intellectual development, IQ, PQ, physical development, favour with God, spiritual development. Now, that's the weirdest one of all. How does God in flesh grow in favour with God? Well, of course, the answer is he's not growing in favour with God as God in flesh. He's growing in his manhood in favour with God. He's learning to understand who God is. He's learning to understand his voice and be sensitive to that voice and respond to that voice as a man as well, which is mysterious and magnificent. And we could spend probably many, many months just talking about that. And then the last area is favour with man, his EQ, his emotional quotient. We're doing some staff training at the moment in our team on emotional intelligence. How to understand, be aware of your own emotions, how to handle those in the context of a very busy church setting and minister to people well. And Jesus is emotionally secure. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you come to reading the Gospels again, don't just read the Gospels and look at the miracles. Read the Gospels and look at how Jesus treats people. Treats people outstandingly well. And the reason he does that is because he knows people. He gets them. Now, how did he get people? Well, the lazy answer is he gets them because he's God. Or, the Luke answer is he got them because he learned about them. He learned with them. He gave himself to them. He understood them. He connected to them. And one of the things you discover in the Gospels is that Jesus liked people. And people, as a result, liked him. I mean, it's not rocket science, is it? They liked him. Now, he was a tough, shrewd, dynamic teacher who did amazing things. And some people, of course, will have liked Jesus because he did miracles. But actually, sinners loved being with Jesus. Yeah. And the reason they loved being with Jesus is because they understood he liked them. We may be stronger than that. He loved them. Yeah. But he certainly liked being in their company. Unlike the other religious leaders who distanced themselves from the common people, Jesus was often found so much amongst the common people that he was labelled the friend of sinners, a glutton and a drunk. Now there's no evidence that Jesus ever overate, and there's no evidence he ever got drunk. But that was the perception. Every time these boys look at him, he's eating something, or he's got a glass of wine in his hand. He seems to be having a great old time. Now the reality is, of course, he's not, in the sense of doing that all the time. But the perception is he's with the people. The reason he's with the people is because he likes people. And the reason people respond to him, even though they don't always understand him, is because they like him. Yeah? And actually, you know, I think leaders in the church needs to learn that. Amen. It's okay to be liked. I was taught as a young Christian, believe this or believe it not, I was taught, if your non-Christian friends like you, there's something wrong with your faith. I was taught the very opposite of the model of Jesus. I was taught they shouldn't like you, they should hate you because you're a Christian. Now, of course, there is a sense in which there's a truth in that if I stand for my faith, they may not like me. But actually, I think we missed the point. The point was that Jesus was so connected with people that he loved them and liked them, that they liked him. Now, how did he do all that? Well, he learned. He grew. He developed. I don't know if you've noticed, but many of the parables of Jesus refer to widows. In fact, the rabbis of the day often used widow as an example of something negative. And women, please forgive me ladies, but women were often used as examples of failure or sin when someone was teaching something. Every time Jesus uses a woman in a story, she's a hero. Amen. You check that out. Amen. And he uses widows a lot. Yeah. And I think the reason he uses widows a lot was because his mum was one. Mary was a widow. And I think Jesus saw firsthand how hard life was as a widow in the first century world. And there's no record that Mary remarried. She may well have done. So Jesus probably sees the heroic efforts of his mother firsthand as a widow. And to me, it's not a coincidence that widows pop up in his stories. That's the human Jesus. Now, we don't think of Jesus like that. We think of Jesus as floating around with the yellow and the blue eyes and the blonde hair and the pale skin. All of which is complete nonsense. All of it. If Jesus was in a crowd, we would struggle to distinguish him. That's right. He looked like a normal first century Jewish man. That's right. Alright? And yet understood people. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to dig under to show you. Jesus didn't just appear out of heaven. The finished article. Luke tells us Jesus grew. And the encouraging thing is this, that if Jesus grew in those areas, so can we. So, me and you, whatever our intellectual standing, you and I could grow in wisdom. Now, your growth may be different from the growth of the person beside you, but you can still grow. Yes? You and I can grow in stature. We can take responsibility for our physical well-being and make some decisions that can help us to be strong for God physically. You and I can make decisions today to grow in our spiritual relationship with God. And you and I can make decisions that I'm not very good with people. My personality type's not very good with people, we might say. But we can still learn about people if we want to. Yes? My granny used to say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, that's not in the Bible. So, I really want to encourage you as leaders, don't take your wisdom from fridge magnets or from your granny. Let's take our wisdom from the Bible. My granny was wrong, because we're neither old dogs, nor are we past learning. Every person in this room, I don't know who the oldest person is, but the oldest person in this room still has an opportunity to grow and learn. The only reason you're not growing is because you don't want to grow. That's right. No, it's because I'm old. Where does it say that in the Bible? Yes?
Amen. Yeah.
So, growing's not the prerogative of the young. Growing's for everybody. And actually, God wants us to be people who are growing till the day we die. Amen? Come on, that's for all of us. And there. Now let me just show you. Jesus grew in some key areas. We could spend so much time on each of these. But, for example, Jesus was multilingual. I suspect Jesus definitely could speak at least 3 languages, possibly 4. So he would have been able to speak Aramaic. That was the common people's language, is sort of the variation of Hebrew. He could definitely speak and read Hebrew because he was a rabbi. And he would have been able to read and speak Hebrew because we have evidence of that in the Gospels. And not everybody in Jesus' world, even Jews, could read Hebrew. So it's a very interesting thing. He probably could speak Greek because he was a craftsman working in Galilee. And as a craftsman in Galilee, he would have to work with Gentiles in the Greek areas. The fact that Jesus couldn't speak Greek is to me unbelievable. He would have been able to speak Greek as a business person. And he probably, or possibly, may have been able to speak Latin, which was the language of the empire that he grew up in, the Roman Empire. Now, that one we can have a wee debate about, but the first 3, absolutely no doubt that Jesus could speak those 3 languages. Well, how did he learn those? So, he just had them, he's God. No, he had to learn those languages. It's an amazing thought that Jesus had to learn to read the Hebrew alphabet. If you like, he had to learn the law that he wrote. Isn't that an amazing thought? And Jesus had to go to what we call the house of interpretation, bent in the grass, in order to learn those things. As a craftsman, he was very proficient. In fact, in Mark 6, that's what he's known as. Yeah. Isn't this the carpenter? That's right. Now, the reason they know him as a carpenter is because he's good at it. If he was a rubbish carpenter, nobody would be talking about him. He wouldn't be making any money. So, and in fact, the word points to something more than a carpenter. The word is tekton, which points to the idea of someone who can not only work with wood, but possibly work with stone, which in the first century world makes sense. Because even today in Israel, there's not a lot of houses made out of wood. There's not a lot of forests in Israel. So a lot of stone. So if you can work with stone and with wood, you earn more money. Alright? Because Jesus had to earn money as well. Yes, it didn't just drop out of the heavens and come to the angels. The most famous part we know Jesus by is rabbi. And I want to just show you this. Rabbi means, anyone know what it means? Teacher. Exactly, very good. Although in the first century world, it may have meant more master than teacher. So there's a little bit of a spin-over, master-teacher, that idea. And Jesus is saying, actually, he's accepted as an expert rabbi. In fact, at one point, he argues the Bible so well that the experts say, let's not ask him any more questions, because he's kicking our pan in. Every time we open our mouth, he beats us in the arguments, and Jesus shows himself to be an expert in the Bible. Now, to put that into context for you, the Pharisees, you've heard of the Pharisees, haven't you? The Pharisees were a religious sect who took the Bible very seriously. In fact, Jesus' theology and the Pharisees' theology is actually very close. And when I teach the Gospel of Luke to the students at Mattersay, I actually teach them that I think the Pharisees thought that Jesus was a good Pharisee gone bad. But he had sort of gone off the rails. His theology is very similar, and you'll notice that Jesus never criticizes the Pharisees for their theology. He criticizes the Pharisees for their behavior. Now, note that, you check it out. But he doesn't criticize them for in fact, he says in Matthew 23, listen to what they say, but don't do what they do. Because they do not practice what they preach. That's where the phrase comes from. Yes? So Jesus is really, really good and demonstrates his ability. Now, to be an expert, my goodness, how much work would that take? Let me just show you something. I'll step out of the Bible for 5 minutes and then we'll come back to it in a wee minute. I don't know if you've heard of the 10,000 hour rule. Yes. Now, there's a lot of controversy around this. Some people really believe it. Some people are questioning it. But someone called Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers, in which he espouses the 10,000 hour rule. And essentially the idea is this, that anyone who becomes a master or an expert in their area of expertise, if you correlate the work back, they will have put something like at least 10,000 hours of work into that issue.
That's right.
So in other words, to be a top violinist, you've probably done 10,000 hours of practice. Right? If you're at the top of your trade as a musician or a sports person or whatever, it may correlate back. Now, it doesn't always hold, and that's why there's controversy around it, but it is unbelievably consistent.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Now, let's just for a moment apply the 10,000 hour rule to Jesus. So Jesus becomes an expert in the Bible. So good. Let me give you one example of Jesus' expertise. Remember in Luke chapter 4, he reads from what we call Isaiah 61. Remember that passage where he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me." Right? Now, Isaiah in our Bible is in a nice, neat book form. It has chapter divisions and verse divisions. Isaiah in Jesus' day would have been a scroll. One of the biggest scrolls in the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. And it would have been unrolled in such a way that when you opened it up, there's no chapter divisions. There's no verse divisions. It is a mass of continuous text. If you and I looked at it, and we could show you pictures of it, because we have copies of it even today, you would look at it just looks like line upon line upon line of squiggles. Right? Hebrew. And Hebrew goes from right to left, back to front. Just to make life more difficult for us. Alright, so, when it says in Luke 4, Jesus found the place where it is written. Think about that. Right? He found the place. Right, now, for me to find Isaiah 61 on my iPad, it's really simple. I just have to hit Isaiah 61, verse 1. Done. In your Bible, if you're stuck, you can go to the index, give you a page. And even if you don't know where it is, in a couple of minutes you're going to find it. Jesus didn't have chapters and didn't have verses. And in the biggest scroll of the Old Testament, he unrolled it and found the exact spot. What we call Isaiah 61. Without an address. Just found it. Now, that was really lucky, wasn't it? No, it wasn't lucky. Why did Jesus find it? Because he knew where it was. How did he know where it was? Because he'd studied it before. Exactly. See what I mean? See, when we read the Bible, those wee clues, we just miss. And it's understandable why we miss them. Why would we notice them? But that little phrase, he found the place, is so significant. Because as a 30-year-old man, he had studied the scriptures so much that he was able to find an exact reference in the Hebrew text that doesn't have any chapters or verses. Remarkable stuff. Alright? Now if we applied the 10,000 hour rule to Jesus in this way, it's really staggering. Gladwell calls the 10,000 hour rule the magic number of success. And he makes this comment. Now, we may or may not agree with this, but he says this: the closer psychologists look at the careers of the gifted, so we'll class Jesus here as the gifted, the smaller the role of innate talent seems to play. In other words, the gift itself's not the big issue, because they've got that gift, it's there. And the bigger the role, preparation seems to play. So in other words, they're saying this: no matter how talented you are, if you're not working on your talent, the giftedness doesn't go as high as it could. Yes? See what I'm saying? So actually, no matter how gifted you are, if we don't work on it, but if we do work on it, that's there. So that's Jesus clearly has the call of God in his life, but he doesn't sit back and go, I'm called by God, I'm God in flesh, I'm just waiting for stuff to happen. No, what does he do? He works hard at the Bible. He works hard at learning. He works hard at the scriptures. He works hard. Probably when his father dies, he probably has to go and serve and get a job and grow in his trade to look after the family as the oldest son. And any learning now he's doing at night under maybe, oil lamp. And he's doing all of that work really, really hard. And that's a remarkable thing. And we just think that Jesus turns up clever. But actually, the Bible teaches us, and even Malcolm Gladwell sort of teaches us, Jesus worked at being clever. Yeah? You with me? So, let's imagine Jesus starts reading the Bible or studying the Bible at 5, which for a Jewish boy was not uncommon. There are records that show that dads would often start teaching their sons the Bible at 5. So let's imagine he starts at 5. And remember, he starts his ministry at 30, so that's when we see him starting to preach. So he's got 25 years to work on the Bible. If we follow the 10,000 hour rule, that means that Jesus puts 400 hours a year into just studying the Bible, on top of everything else that he does. That's a lot of study, isn't it? That's about 6 or 7 hours a week, depending on how you cut it. That's a lot, isn't it? Yeah? Great challenge to us. And I have to say, that challenges me in the 21st century. I meet a lot of people. I was involved in helping to train leaders for many years in the context of my former denomination. And I was amazed at the lack of work leaders were prepared to put into basic study of the Bible. Yeah. And I used to have to try and push them to study the Bible, and they would try to find many of the different ways to shortcut the process and push back a lot on this issue. And they would say this to me. They'd say things like this: I don't have time to study the Bible. Right? Now, I understand that. Maybe holding down a job, a secular job, while running a church. I get that. But at some point, if they're going to stand in pulpits and teach people in their churches or in their world the Bible, then they need to get into the Bible. At some point, they've got to change that. Now, we must not neglect it. I'm only picking on one area of Jesus' growth in this area. But again, it demonstrates this, and I want you to see this. And if you forget the detail, remember this. Jesus didn't just turn up clever. He didn't just turn up with a Bible downloaded into his brain. Jesus was able to teach the Bible expertly because Jesus spent 25 years studying the Bible. Yeah? And that's a challenge to us, even as leaders. What's remarkable is that when you cut Jesus' life into segments, the ministry bit, the 3 years of ministry, and the bit of his life pre-ministry, the bit of his life pre-ministry represents 91% of his life. And the bit in ministry represents 9%. So Jesus spent 91% preparing for 9%. Now, in our world, I often encounter the opposite equation. I meet people who want to have 90%, 91% of in the limelight for 9% work. Yeah. They want, it's X Factorism, they want to stand on the X Factor and shortcut the process and get to fame and fortune quickly. And actually, even in Jesus' life, what does that teach us? It teaches us process. It teaches us, even Jesus went through a process of growing and development and learning to become everything that he was meant to be. Now that doesn't sound very exciting, but that's actually very encouraging. This can transform us and change our lives. Because if Jesus went through a process of growth and came to a moment where he was ready to minister and teach, then it teaches me that we can go through that same process. Now, not exactly the same as Jesus, but we can go through that process together. And so, Malcolm Gladwell summarizes like this: successful people, their achievement, however we describe success, their achievement is summed up this way: preparation plus talent plus opportunity. So, have they got talent? Absolutely. Was Jesus a talented person? Absolutely. But without the preparation, the talent won't be able to take the opportunity. So opportunities can present themselves, but talent alone won't allow us to take it. What will help us to take it is growth and preparation, development and maturity. And me and you are able to take those opportunities in our world, in our churches, in our ministry context. And here's the thing I've discovered: the more prepared you are, the more opportunities you're able to take. it's living prepared, it's living ready, it's living learning, it's getting up every day and actually saying to ourselves, I want to grow, and I want to learn, and I want to develop in everything that I'm doing. And so that equation there is accessible to every person in this room. It'll look different for everybody. So achievement for everyone in this room will look different. Yeah? Just will. Talent for everyone in this room looks different because we've all got different talents. And preparation will look different, and the opportunities will look different, but the process, the equation, will look the same for us all. And it's amazing, the more seriously we take preparation and learning, and I don't just mean learning, reading books, I mean growing, learning, the more seriously we take that, the more our talent can be used effectively for the glory of God. And then the more ready, if you like, we are to take the opportunities that are presented to us. Andy Stanley says this, I love this, in his book Visioneering. He says this: everybody ends up somewhere, but a few people end up somewhere on purpose. Yeah? So everyone in this room will end up somewhere. But actually God wants us to end up somewhere on purpose. That we're not just randomly arriving, but we're intentionally arriving. We remember Jesus' words, I'm about my Father's business or Father's house. What's that? The sense of purpose. And so Jesus gets that purpose, and then he designs his life. He aligns his life in line with the purpose of the Father. So, some of the questions we need to ask ourselves just as we go to a break is, where does God want us to go? So for each of us that will look different individually. So let's think of you as an individual. Where does God want you to go? Has God said anything to you? Has he spoke to you about your future? Has he spoke to you about your purpose? Where does he want you to go? Or we can think about that collectively. Where does he want us to go as a group of leaders, as a church? Where does he want us to go? The second question then that we answer is, what do we need to do to help us get to where we want to go? Yeah? What do we need to do to get us to where we want to go? So, if God wants us to go in that direction, to do that thing, what do I need to do to make myself ready for that journey? Yes? What do I need to pack in the case? What do I need to carry with me? What do I need to learn? What do I need to do? Yes? Okay. Simple questions we can ask. And then lastly, how? And we'll talk a little bit about that now in the second section. How do we design a plan that helps us to grow every day? Because it comes down not just to the purpose and the direction, but it comes down to me and you sort of designing a plan, literally or metaphorically, designing a plan and then sticking to the plan and saying, that's where we are going. That's what we want to do. How are we going to achieve that? So Jesus understood what the Father wanted. Jesus understood where the Father wanted to take him. And what Luke 2:52 teaches us is that Jesus had a how. He grew in wisdom, in stature, favour with God and with man. That's his how. And actually, I think 2:52 represents a brilliant potential how, if you like, for each one of us. How can I grow? How can I be ready for what God wants me to do? How can I be a better leader? How can I develop? Actually, 2:52 gives us that very simple blueprint that we can follow.